What if death was not the end of love? What if, in ancient times, intimacy stretched beyond the grave, binding the living and the dead in rituals that challenge our very ideas of life and love? Journey with us into the mysterious world where ancient cultures practiced intimate customs with those who had passed on, rituals shrouded in secrecy, devotion, and taboo. Prepare yourself for a story where the living and the dead are entwined in ways both fascinating and unsettling. Imagine a world where the boundary between life and death is not a barrier but a bridge, where love, devotion, and social bonds extend beyond the grave. Picture an ancient chamber, dimly lit by flickering candles and thick with incense smoke. There, amidst whispered prayers and solemn faces, a ritual unfolds that challenges our deepest beliefs about mortality and intimacy. In this sacred and mysterious place, the living come together with the dead in ways that defy modern understanding, weaving a complex tapestry of tradition, spirituality, and emotion. Welcome to the hidden realm of ancient culture's intimate rituals with the dead, a world shrouded in mystery, devotion, and taboo. For millennia, many civilizations around the globe have engaged in deeply symbolic ceremonies that unite the living and the deceased through acts of intimacy, not as mere aberrations, but as vital cultural practices that helped shape their understanding of love, family, and the afterlife. To comprehend these rituals, we must first journey back to a time when death was viewed not as an end, but as a passage to another world. The dead did not simply vanish. Their presence lingered, influencing the daily lives, beliefs, and customs of the living. This perspective blurred the boundaries between life and death, forming a foundation where intimate rituals involving the dead emerged naturally and became embedded in the fabric of society. One of the most enduring and well-documented examples of such a practice is the ghost marriage of ancient China. Dating back over 1,000 years and continuing in some rural regions even today, ghost marriages were arrangements where a living individual would marry someone who had already passed away. These unions were carefully negotiated, with dowries exchanged and ceremonies conducted with the same solemnity as any other marriage. The reasons for these rituals were deeply rooted in social and familial obligations to preserve lineage, honor the deceased's family, and ensure that no spirit was left isolated, wandering without companionship. In these ceremonies, the bride would dress in traditional attire, and all festivities typical of a wedding would take place, except one partner was absent from the mortal realm. In some cases, two deceased individuals might be wed posthumously to unify their families or settle disputes. This blending of spiritual belief and social practice highlights the profound cultural significance of intimacy beyond death. It is gendered, emotional, and pragmatic all at once, preserving honor, upholding family ties, and ensuring spiritual harmony. Further west, along the banks of the Nile, the ancient Egyptians practiced a different but equally symbolic form of intimacy with the dead. In their spiritual worldview, death was merely a step toward eternal life in the afterworld, provided that the necessary rituals were observed. Funerary texts, tomb paintings, and statuary reveal that family members engaged in acts symbolizing care and companionship for the deceased. Offerings of food, drink, and precious items were topped with prayers or whispered words of affection. The intimacy, however, was often portrayed symbolically rather than physically. Statues representing spouses or loved ones stood vigil near tombs, ensuring that the deceased were never truly alone. In some funerary rituals, the living would touch or embrace the deceased's effigy as a means of maintaining bonds that transcended the physical divide. The belief in the soul's journey and the afterlife imbued these acts with deep meaning, reflecting a desire to preserve connection and continuity even after death. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamia and other ancient Near Eastern cultures further illustrates that rituals involving intimate contact with the dead were not confined to one region or belief system. Cuneiform tablets and burial sites reveal ceremonies performed to placate spirits, form alliances between families, and enforce social obligations beyond the tomb. These practices underscore a human fascination with bridging mortality's final frontier, forging bonds that could not be severed by death. Anthropologists and historians have long studied these ancient customs, seeking to understand the complex psychology and cultural frameworks that compelled societies to engage in such rituals. From a psychological perspective, these ceremonies may reflect a universal desire to confront and mitigate the fear of death, to maintain relationships, and to assert control over the unknown. Intimacy with the dead, in this sense, becomes both a coping mechanism and a reaffirmation of life itself. As we continue our exploration, we will delve deeper into the specific ceremonies, their cultural variations, and the multifaceted meanings they held for the communities that practiced them. From ghost marriages that bind families across time to the symbolic embraces in Egyptian tombs and beyond, these rituals reveal humanity's enduring quest to understand love, loss, and the mysteries that lie beyond death. As we step deeper into the shadowy realm of ancient intimacy with the dead, the rituals themselves emerge like flickering lanterns, illuminating a world both fascinating and unsettling. These ceremonies were never mere curiosities. They were profound expressions of social order, spirituality, and human emotion. They shaped family ties, religious frameworks, and community cohesion in cultures across the globe. Let us begin with one of the most intriguing and enduring practices: the ghost marriages of ancient China. This custom, dating back over 1,000 years and still observed in some rural areas today, illustrates vividly how the living and the deceased were bound in matrimonial union. These marriages were arranged when a young person died unmarried and their family sought to secure their place in the afterlife. This was not merely a spiritual concern, but also a social one, ensuring that the deceased's lineage was honored and their spirit at peace. The process of ghost marriage was much like any marriage of the living. Negotiations took place between families, dowries were exchanged, and matchmakers were involved. The ceremonies were elaborate, mirroring those of traditional weddings, but with the haunting difference that one party was no longer alive. In some cases, a living bride would marry a deceased groom and enter his family lineage, fulfilling her role both in spirit and society. In other instances, two deceased persons were wed in posthumous ceremonies, sometimes to settle family disputes or unite houses. These unions were taken very seriously. The living bride could be expected to perform specific rituals and duties, honoring her husband and ensuring family harmony. Such arrangements were also deeply emotional, a way for families to cope with loss and to maintain bonds that death alone could not sever. Ghost marriages alleviated fears of isolation in the afterlife for the deceased, while reinforcing social cohesion among the living. Far from being morbid or voyeuristic, this practice reveals a cultural worldview where intimacy, duty, and love extended beyond mortal limits. The lines between physical presence and spiritual reality blurred, creating a continuum where the living and the dead remained forever connected. Traveling westward to the ancient civilization of Egypt, we encounter a distinct, yet equally profound set of rituals, expressing intimacy with the dead. For the Egyptians, death was not an ending, but the gateway to an eternal afterlife, a journey that required careful preparation and constant remembrance. Their funerary practices were among the most elaborate and symbolically rich in the ancient world. In Egyptian tombs, paintings and inscriptions depict familial scenes where the living provide offerings of food, drink, and clothing to the deceased. These acts were more than ritualistic. They were intimate gestures reflecting care, affection, and ongoing relationships. Statues representing spouses or loved ones often accompanied the deceased, serving as eternal companions. These figures were thoughtfully placed within tombs to ensure that the dead would not wander alone in the afterlife. The living family members would perform ceremonies touching or embracing these statues, symbolizing physical closeness and emotional support. They also recited prayers and incantations to nurture the deceased spirit, ensuring their well-being in the next world. This intimacy was symbolic, blending physical representation and spiritual belief. It reflected a deep conviction that love, bond, and social identity transcended death's finality. The pharaohs themselves, alongside common folk, were believed to require these ongoing acts of devotion to secure immortality and happiness beyond the grave. Beyond China and Egypt, archaeological and textual evidence from Mesopotamia, Africa, and indigenous cultures worldwide reveals similar intimate practices involving the dead. In Mesopotamian societies, rituals were performed to appease spirits, particularly those of people who had died prematurely or violently. These restless souls were feared to become malevolent if not properly placated. Ceremonies often included inviting the dead to communal meals, made both literally and symbolically. By sharing food with the deceased, families maintained a sense of connection and responsibility, blurring boundaries and extending hospitality beyond life. In certain African communities, spiritual unions between descendants and ancestors were solemnized through ceremonies that bound families to their lineage and guarded their prosperity. These rituals solidified social bonds, maintained ancestral respect, and ensured spiritual oversight. Native tribes across the Americas also engaged in commemorative dances, storytelling, and offerings directed at their ancestors, using intimate symbolism to express ongoing care and remembrance. These acts were designed not only to honor the dead, but to draw strength and wisdom from them. So why did such diverse cultures invest so much meaning and energy into rituals that cross the ultimate boundary? Anthropologists and psychologists point to universal human fears and desires. The fear of death and what lies beyond is perhaps the strongest of all primal fears. Rituals that soften this fear by providing order, meaning, and continuity are crucial for psychological survival. Engaging in practices that maintain bonds with the dead helps individuals and societies confront loss and mortality with courage and hope. Human beings are also fundamentally relational. Our desire for connection transcends physical life, shaping our need to preserve relationships even after death. Whether romantic, familial, or social, these connections provide identity and comfort. Moreover, these rituals often fulfilled practical and political ends. Ensuring lineage, inheritance, and social stability were paramount concerns, and acts of intimacy with the dead helped uphold these structures. Finally, these ceremonies had therapeutic value. They offered a framework for processing grief, gave purpose to mourning, and created spaces for expressing emotions otherwise difficult to voice. Across different regions and millennia, common themes emerge in these practices. The desire to preserve continuity, to honor and respect the dead, to navigate boundaries between worlds, and to assert some mastery over the mysteries of death. Even as the expressions of these themes differ widely, from Chinese ghost marriages to Egyptian tomb rituals, Mesopotamian appeasements to African ceremonies, they reveal a shared human impulse. That impulse is the need to weave the living and the dead into an unbroken tapestry of love, duty, and existence. As our journey continues into the final part, we will explore how these intimate rituals with the dead are perceived today, the controversies they raise, and what they tell us about humanity itself, our struggles, our hopes, and our timeless quest to understand the deepest mysteries of life and death. As we shift from the ancient rituals themselves to their reflections and legacies, it becomes clear that these intimate practices with the dead are far more than bizarre footnotes in history. They are windows into humanity's deepest struggles, hopes, and complex relationships with mortality and connection. These customs reveal a worldview profoundly different from our own, one that challenges everything we take for granted about life, death, and intimacy. Modern societies tend to enforce a strict division between the living and the dead. When someone passes away, their presence is gradually removed from daily life, and the physical and emotional boundaries solidify. Intimacy in its many forms, physical, emotional, social, is almost exclusively reserved for the living. Our funerary customs emphasize separation and finality, and most cultures regard acts of physical intimacy involving the dead as taboo or even legally prohibited. Yet when we examine the rituals of ghost marriages in China, funerary intimacy in Egypt, and similar practices worldwide, we uncover an entirely different philosophy. These cultures embrace death not as a definitive end, but as a continuation, a transition to a parallel realm where relationships endured and even flourished. Ghost marriages continue in some rural regions of China today, despite laws discouraging the practice. The living participants, often brides marrying deceased grooms, find solace, community acceptance, and a sense of belonging through these unions. Far from being viewed as supernatural oddities, these marriages are deeply ingrained in cultural identity and social order. They provide a structured way to address grief, familial obligations, and spiritual needs. This continuity of relationship beyond death challenges our modern worldview. It blurs the lines between reality and spirit, presence and absence. It reminds us that concepts of intimacy and connection are culturally shaped, evolving with the needs and beliefs of societies. The ethical questions surrounding these rituals are complex and deserve nuanced consideration. Modern observers might question the agency of living spouses in ghost marriages or critique the implications of consent. It is crucial, however, to approach these topics with cultural humility rather than judgment. These practices, born in vastly different social contexts, were meaningful responses to universal human experiences of love, loss, and the desire to maintain connection. Similarly, ancient Egyptian funerary rites, while symbolic rather than physical, manifest a profound intimacy with the dead. The daily offerings, touching of effigies and prayers serve as ongoing acts of affection and reverence, emphasizing that death does not sever the bonds of love and family. It was believed that such care ensured the deceased's happiness and protection in the afterlife, a continuation of marital and familial roles beyond death. These customs have echoed through time, influencing literature, mythology, art, and folklore. Chinese ghost marriages appear in classic opera and storytelling, dramatizing tension between life, death, duty, and love. Egyptian beliefs about eternal companionship and the afterlife have captivated imaginations for centuries, inspiring countless cultural works. Folklore from Africa and indigenous American tribes preserves stories of ancestral spirits who continue to influence and protect the living, underlying the shared human recognition that intimacy transcends mortal boundaries. Anthropologists and psychologists propose several overlapping reasons for the widespread emergence of these rituals. Fear of death and the unknown is perhaps the most primal driver. Understanding death is impossible, but rituals provide structure and meaning, easing anxiety and grief. The desire to preserve relationships beyond death represents a universal emotional impulse. Whether romantic bonds, familial ties, or social connections, these relationships form the foundation of human identity and provide comfort in the face of loss. Furthermore, these rituals often served practical and political functions. They maintained lineage legitimacy, ensured social stability, and reinforced communal values. Therapeutically, they offered a formalized channel for mourning and remembrance, allowing individuals to express grief safely and participate actively in the ongoing well-being of deceased loved ones. Across cultures, some central themes emerge unmistakably: continuity through death, respect and honor for ancestors, ritual negotiation of boundaries, and the attempt to assert control over mortality's chaos. These motifs appear time and again, from solemn ghost weddings in China to symbolic embraces in Egypt, from ancestral ceremonies in Africa to storytelling in the Americas. They reflect a shared human need to transcend the finality of death and affirm the enduring nature of intimacy. As we reflect on these ancient practices, we confront an eternal question. What does it mean to love and lose? How do we maintain connection when everything familiar fades? The rituals discussed offer answers shaped by history, culture, and belief, yet they invite us to consider our own relationship with love and death. In today's world, these practices may seem distant or even unsettling, yet they remind us that intimacy is not limited to the physical, nor bound strictly by life's final breath. They challenge us to expand our understanding of love's reach and resilience. Perhaps beneath the surface of these rituals lies a fundamental human defiance, an instinct to assert connection, to celebrate love, and to defy the silence of death. If this deep dive into the mystery of ancient intimate rituals with the dead both disturbed and fascinated you, consider exploring further into humanity's hidden past. History contains endless stories of love, loss, and survival that continue to shape who we are. Click the video appearing on your screen now to unlock more forgotten chapters of our shared human experience. Subscribe, and together we will peel back the layers of time, journeying ever deeper into the darkest, most intimate corners of history.